The ghost of her laughter was the cruelest specter. It haunted the sterile silence of Alex's apartment, a space that suddenly felt too large, too empty. A hollowed-out cavern echoing with the memory of a presence that was no longer his to enjoy. He sat on the edge of his meticulously made bed, the grey duvet pulled taut like a drumskin, staring at the phone in his hand. The screen was dark, a black mirror reflecting a man he barely recognized, hollow-eyed, shoulders slumped, a portrait of quiet desperation. For 3 days, that screen had remained unchanged. 3 days since Sarah had last replied, 3 days since she had vanished from his digital life, leaving behind a single gout-trenching blue tick as her tombstone read. 72 hours ago, he had poured his heart into that last message, not in a desperate, pleading way or so he'd told himself, but in a genuine, open, Alex way. He'd told her how much he enjoyed their last date, how the conversation had flowed like a river, how her smile had a way of lighting up not just her face, but the entire room. He'd suggested another meeting, a cozy Italian place she'd mentioned, a place he'd already researched, checking its reviews, its menu, even its ambient lighting. He was a man who paid attention to details. He was a man who cared, and for that, his reward was silence, a digital abyss. GHOSTAD. Meanwhile, a different man lived rent-free in her head, and Alex knew exactly who he was. Julian, the name itself felt like a shard of glass under his tongue. Julian, with his leather jacket that smelled of faded cologne and something vaguely illicit, with his motorcycle that roared like a beast unleashed, with his infuriatingly smug grin that promised nothing and everything all at once. Alex had seen them together once. A fleeting glimpse outside a downtown bar. Sarah was laughing, that same incandescent laugh, but it was different. It was sharper, laced with a nervous energy, a giddy uncertainty. Julian had his arm draped casually over her shoulder, his attention split between her and the conversation he was having with someone else. He was barely listening to her, yet she was looking at him as if he were the sun, the source of all light and warmth. The injustice of it burned like acid in Alex's chest. He was the one who listened. He remembered the name of her childhood dog, her favorite obscure indie band, the fact that she hated cilantro with a fiery passion. He was consistent, he was respectful, he was emotionally available, a term he had learned and embraced, believing it was the hallmark of a modern, evolved man. He had offered her stability, kindness, a safe harbor in the chaotic sea of modern dating, and she had sailed right past his harbor, chasing a pirate ship into a storm. Wasn't just Sarah, it was a pattern. A recurring nightmare that had stalked him through his 20s and into his early 30s. Rebecca, who had friend-zoned him with the classic, "You're like a brother to me," before getting back with an ex who had cheated on her twice. Chloe, who had breadcrumbed him for months, feeding him just enough attention to keep him on the hook, while she explored her options, ultimately choosing a guy who defined his personality by the sports car he leased. The faces changed, but the story remained the same. Good guys, the men who would treat a woman like a queen, were left standing on the sidelines, watching the jesters and tyrants lead the parade. "It's not fair," he whispered to the empty room, the words tasting like ash. But what if fairness had nothing to do with it? What if attraction wasn't a reward for good behavior? This question had started as a faint whisper in the back of his mind, a heretical thought he'd always pushed away. But now, in the deafening silence of Sarah's absence, it was a roar. It seemed insane, it seemed counterintuitive, it seemed wrong. But the evidence was undeniable, a mountain of anecdotal data that he could no longer ignore. He stood up, pacing the floor of his living room, the city lights of downtown glittering like cold, indifferent stars through his floor-to-ceiling windows. He had built a good life, a senior software engineer at a thriving tech firm, a minimalist apartment that screamed taste and success, a disciplined gym routine, a healthy diet. He had built himself into the man he thought a woman like Sarah would want: stable, secure, good. The problem was, women like Sarah didn't seem to want what was good for them. They were drawn to what moved them. And as he stared at his own reflection in the dark glass, a man encased in a perfect, sterile box of his own making, he had to admit, there was nothing moving about him. He was a still life painting. Julian was a raging fire. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, and his heart leaped into his throat with a pathetic, Pavlovian jolt. He scrambled for it, his thumb swiping across the screen before he even registered the name. That it wasn't Sarah. It was a notification from a forum he'd stumbled upon late one night, a corner of the internet he visited with a mix of shame and morbid curiosity. It was a place where men discussed these very dynamics, a place filled with cynical, often bitter theories about female nature, He usually dismissed it as the ranting of the jilted and misogynistic, but tonight, one thread title caught his eye: The Indifference Game, Why the Men Who Care the Least Win the Most. He tapped on it and began to read. The post was written by a user named Marcus Aurelius, a man who wrote not with the angry vitriol of the other posters, but with a cold, detached, almost philosophical clarity. You have been taught a lie, the post began. You have been told that attraction is a transaction of virtue. You offer kindness, respect, and loyalty, and in return, you receive desire. This is the logic of the marketplace, not the heart. The heart does not operate on logic. It operates on emotion. It is a primal chemical, deeply irrational engine, and this engine is not fueled by safety. It is fueled by stimulus. Alex sat down, his back against the cold wall, and continued to read. Consider the object of your affection. She is not drawn to the toxic man because she enjoys pain or disrespect. To believe that is to underestimate her. She is drawn to him because he creates a powerful emotional and chemical cocktail in her brain that you, the good guy, do not. He is unpredictable. His attention is scarce. His validation is a prize to be won, not a gift freely given. This creates a devastatingly addictive loop. The post broke it down with chilling precision. The dopamine hit from the chase, the high of intermittent reinforcement when he finally texts back, the cortisol spike from the uncertainty, the stress of not knowing where she stands, the adrenaline rush from the drama, the highs and lows that make her feel intensely alive. It was an addictive cycle, a neurological trap. When you arrive, with your calm consistency, your unwavering support, your open heart, you are offering her a healthy meal. She knows it's good for her. She may even genuinely like you for it, but he has just offered her a line of cocaine, and her nervous system, conditioned by biology and a lifetime of romantic narratives, is screaming for the drug, not the quinoa salad. Alex felt a nauseous lurch in his stomach. It was cynical, it was bleak, but it resonated with a terrifying truth. He thought back to his dates with Sarah. They were pleasant, they were nice. He had focused on creating comfort, on making her feel safe. He had laid all his cards on the table, wanting to prove his worth, to show her he was serious, that he was a sure thing. But in doing so, he had created no tension, no mystery, no chase. He had offered her a tranquil pond when her soul craved a raging ocean. The worst guys, the Julians of the world, didn't love women better. They manipulated their emotional systems better, whether they knew it or not. The revelation was a crack in the foundation of his worldview. Attraction wasn't about being a good person. Obsession wasn't born from kindness. It was born from emotional stimulation. He spent the next hour falling down the rabbit hole, reading every post by this Marcus. The man was a ghost. No personal details. Just post after post of brutally honest, psychologically astute analysis. He wrote about the power of scarcity, the irresistible pull of a man who withholds himself. Think about the last man she couldn't stop talking about. One post read, was he the most honest, the most respectful, the most emotionally supportive, or was he distant, mysterious, perhaps even a little reckless? He withheld himself. He never gave her full access. That is the psychological trigger when a woman feels she can't quite figure you out. When your presence feels earned, not given, her mind locks in. It starts to build stories around you. It starts to fantasize. Obsession is born not from the facts she knows about you, but from the gaps you leave for her to fill. Alex's own behavior seemed foolish in this new, harsh light. He had been a fire hose of information and availability. He texted first. He texted again. He double texted. He filled every silent space, believing that connection was built through constant presence, through more communication. He wanted to give her everything, to prove he had nothing to hide. But in doing so, he had given her complete clarity. And with clarity came comfort. With comfort, boredom. And boredom, as Marcus Aurelius wrote, was the death of desire. Connection is felt in the gaps, not in the flood, the post concluded. Mystery isn't created by playing games. It's created by restraint. This was the instinctual genius of men like Julian. They didn't explain where they'd been. They didn't rush to reply. Their carelessness was mistaken for confidence, their aloofness for high value. They didn't flood her with presents. It created a vacuum, and her thoughts rushed in to fill the void. The solution, according to the faceless mentor on the screen, was not to become a toxic asshole. That was the crucial distinction. That was the path of the weak man trying to imitate strength. The real solution was to understand the mechanics and use them with discipline and integrity. You stop chasing. You stop explaining. You exist in your own frame. You let her step into your energy rather than flooding hers. A woman does not want to lead emotionally. She wants to follow a man she can't quite own. And the man who masters this balance of presence and absence, of warmth and distance, becomes unforgettable. The words hit him like a physical blow. A man she can't quite own. He had been trying to hand himself over to Sarah, gift-wrapped with a bow, hoping she would accept the offering. He had been acting like a supplicant, not a leader. He scrolled further, his fingers trembling slightly. The next topic was validation, a currency he had been handing out for free. He remembered complimenting Sarah constantly, on her dress, her intelligence, her laugh. He thought he was building her up, showing his appreciation, but he was devaluing the currency with every thoughtless compliment. Validation is the fuel the worst guys weaponize, Marcus Aurelius wrote. They give just enough to keep her hooked, then they pull it back. That inconsistency hijacks her dopamine system. Her brain starts craving the next high. This behavior is manipulative in the hands of a narcissist, but the psychology behind it isn't evil, it's primal. The female mind interprets earned attention as more valuable than freely given attention. When you give validation too freely, it loses its weight. It becomes expected, and therefore, meaningless. The solution wasn't to become cold or insulting. It was to become intentional, to validate with strength, not desperation, to say less, but mean more, to compliment her when it truly mattered, when she had genuinely impressed him, but not to make it a routine, to keep her guessing, not to confuse her, but to excite her when she never quite knows where she stands with you. She can't stop thinking about you. Then came the topic of emotional control. This one cut the deepest. He remembered a time. Sarah had cancelled a date at the last minute. He had been disappointed, and he had let it show. He'd sent a text asking if everything was okay, if he had done something wrong. He was seeking reassurance, pleading for answers. He was revealing his emotional dependence on her actions. Julian, he imagined, would have just replied with a "all right, catch you later," or, more likely, not replied at all. To her, this emotional detachment, this indifference, even if it stemmed from pure carelessness, would read as strength. It created the illusion that he was emotionally independent, that his peace of mind wasn't contingent on her. And women, the post argued, are powerfully drawn to men who do not need them emotionally. When you react too much, get upset, over-apologize, or plead for answers, you reveal your dependence. The worst guys don't give that energy. They don't chase closure, they walk away. They act like they are the prize, and even when their behavior is toxic, that detachment pulls her in. The path forward, then, was to develop true detachment, not a feigned indifference, not a bitter numbness, but a genuine sense of inner peace that came from having a life so rich, so full of purpose, that no single person could ever become its center. Have a life, Marcus Aurelius commanded from the screen, a mission, a purpose that you pursue with relentless fire. When your peace is untouchable, when your happiness is generated from within, your energy becomes addictive, because nothing is sexier to a woman than a man she cannot shake emotionally. Alex looked around his apartment. It was beautiful, clean, a testament to his financial success, but it was just a container. What was his mission, his purpose? He had a good job, but was it a fire in his belly? He had hobbies, but did they consume him with passion, or were they all just carefully curated set pieces in the performance of being a successful man? A performance designed to attract a partner who would finally complete the picture. He was performing. The word leaped out from another post, and it felt like an indictment. The most dangerous thing a nice guy does is perform. You think if you act a certain way, she will reward you with her love. You show up with the gifts, the compliments, the unwavering attention. You are playing the role of the perfect boyfriend, but when you perform for love, she feels it. It's not authentic. It doesn't feel like leadership. It feels like negotiation. It feels like desperation. And women can smell desperation the way a wolf smells fear. The worst guys, the Julians, didn't perform. They didn't seem to care what anyone thought. That unfiltered, untamed, unapologetic energy, even in its most toxic form, felt real. And in the psychology of attraction, reality, however flawed, was a deeper source of power than a flawless performance. Stop acting and start embodying, the post urged. Stop trying to win her. Start living like you've already won yourself. The room was spinning slightly. Alex felt like Neo in the Matrix, waking up from a dream to see the code behind reality. Every failed interaction, every confusing rejection, every time he had watched a woman choose the wrong guy, it all started to click into place. They weren't choosing jerks. They were choosing an energy. They were drawn to the energy that couldn't be bought, couldn't be moved, couldn't be broken. He thought about how these men flirted. It wasn't sweet or overly nice. It was challenging, teasing, playful, with an edge of arrogance. They flirted from a place of abundance, as if they had a dozen other options waiting. They weren't trying to win her. They were making her feel like she had to win them. That reversal, that simple flip of the script, was everything. It shifted the entire power dynamic. Once she felt she was the one pursuing, she became emotionally invested. The emotional labor she put in created attachment. He, on the other hand, tiptoed around. He avoided offense. He tried to be the safe choice. But desire isn't born in safety. It's born in tension. He didn't need to be rude. He just needed to be bold. To speak like a man who wasn't afraid to lose her. To tease like someone who knew his own worth. To flirt like he was already enough. Even the way they ended things was a source of power. They vanished, a silence echoed, creating a vacuum. The nice guy, Alex knew from painful experience, sends closure texts. He asks what went wrong. He pleads for one more chance, confirming what she already suspected. He needed her. The worst guys left damage, but they left an imprint. The silence, the composure, the dignity of walking away without a word. That was what planted the seed of doubt in her mind. Did I just lose something rare? That question, that was where obsession began. Not in your presence, but in your absence. But in your absence. Alex stood up and walked to the window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. The city below was a sprawling circuit board of light and shadow, life and loss. For years he had been trying to play a game without knowing the rules, wondering why he always lost. He thought it was a game of virtue, when it was a game of psychology. He thought it was about fairness, when it was about stimulus. The anger and resentment he had felt towards Sarah began to subside, replaced by a strange, cold clarity. It wasn't her fault. It wasn't even Julian's fault. They were all just playing their parts, driven by subconscious programming they didn't understand. Julian was an unconscious master of the game. Sarah was an unconscious player. And Alex had been an unconscious fool, but not anymore. The teachings of this anonymous stranger on the internet were a bitter pill to swallow. They were stripped of romance, of sentimentality, of the fairy tales he had been fed his whole life. But they held the unmistakable ring of truth. He didn't have to become one of the men he despised. He didn't have to leave wreckage in his wake. That was the key. That was the path this Marcus Aurelius was illuminating. You could use the same patterns: mystery, restraint, detachment, boldness, but combine them with integrity. You could become the man who both stimulates her and stabilizes her. The man who activates her fantasy but grounds her in reality. The man who is emotionally dangerous in his strength, but safe in his character. That was the man women didn't just want. That was the man they worshipped. A new feeling began to coalesce in his chest, pushing out the despair. It was a nascent, fragile thing, but it was there. It was resolved. He would no longer be the nice guy who finishes last. He would no longer perform for love. He would stop trying to be chosen for being good enough and start the arduous journey of becoming unforgettable. He went back to the phone, his fingers flying across the screen, not to the forum, but to his contacts. He found Sarah's name. His thumb hovered over the delete button. For years, he had kept the numbers of his failed connections, little digital ghosts in his pocket, hoping for a resurrection that never came. It was a habit born of scarcity, of the belief that every connection was precious and could not be discarded. He pressed down delete contact. The phone asked. He remembered one of the last lines he'd read: "True strength doesn't chase, it waits." And sometimes, the most powerful move is to walk away for real, without looking back. He pressed delete. Then he went to their message thread, the long history of his hopeful texts and her fading replies. He selected the option to delete the entire conversation, a finality, a cleansing. As the screen wiped clean, the sense of lightness filled him. It wasn't about punishing her. It was about freeing himself. He was no longer waiting for her to text. He was no longer hoping for a reply. He had taken back his emotional sovereignty. He spent the rest of the night not reading, but thinking, planning, devising a new operating system for himself. The old Alex was gone, deleted, along with Sarah's number. The man who would wake up in the morning would be someone new, someone who understood the code. His mission was no longer to find a woman to complete him. His mission was to build a life so compelling, so full of purpose and fire, that he would become the prize. He would forge himself in the fires of discipline, purpose, and self-respect. He would learn the art of emotional detachment, not as coldness, but as control. He would master the dance of tension and mystery, of strength and warmth. He didn't know if he would succeed. The road ahead looked difficult, a path that required him to unlearn a lifetime of conditioning. He would have to confront the weakest parts of himself, the neediness, the fear of loss, the desire for approval. It would be a war waged not in the outside world, but within the confines of his own soul. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of genuine, unadulterated hope. The game had always seemed rigged, unfair, but now, he finally understood the rules and he was ready to play. Not their game, his game. He would crack the code, and then he would rewrite it with integrity. He would become the man who was emotionally disciplined, the man who could command attention without seeking it, the man who, by finally getting himself back, would become irresistible. The battle for his own soul had just begun. The first casualty of Alex's transformation was his routine. For years, his life had been a monument to predictability, a meticulously scheduled existence designed for maximum efficiency and minimum friction. His gym sessions were precisely timed, his meals prepped with algorithmic precision, his evenings a comfortable cycle of work, dinner, and passive entertainment. It was the life of a man waiting for someone to arrive and disrupt it. Now, he became the disruption himself. His new philosophy, gleaned from the cold, hard truths of his digital mentor, Marcus Aurelius, could be distilled into a single imperative: build a life you don't want to escape from. The first step was to trade comfort for challenge, to find a fire and pour gasoline on it. His job as a software engineer was lucrative and intellectually stimulating, but it wasn't a mission, it was a career. He needed a crucible. He found it in a dusty, sweat-stained boxing gym tucked away in an industrial part of the city, a world away from the Chroman Glass Fitness Center where he'd been mindlessly lifting weights. The air here was thick with the smell of leather, liniment, and effort. It was populated by men with scarred knuckles and quiet eyes, men who carried an aura of contained violence. His first day, he felt like an imposter in his brand new athletic wear. He was paired with a grizzled old trainer named Sal, a man whose face was a roadmap of past fights. "You're clean," Sal grunted, looking him up and down with undisguised skepticism. "To clean, you're here to get in shape, or you're here to learn how to take a hit." The old Alex would have said something polite, something agreeable, a bit of both, I guess. But the new Alex was learning to speak from a place of certainty. "I'm here to learn how to not flinch," Alex said, his voice steadier than he expected. Sal's lips curled into something that might have been a smile. "That's a better answer. Not flinching costs you. It's gonna hurt," and it did. The first time he sparred a week later, he tasted his own blood. A jab, faster than he could have imagined, snapped his head back, and the coppery temps filled his mouth. His first instinct was to recoil, to apologize, to stop. But he saw Sal watching from the ropes, his expression unreadable. He remembered the words from the forum: "Women don't test you to destroy you, they test you to measure you, to see where your breaking point is." Life, he was realizing, did the same. He spit the blood into a bucket, raised his gloves, and stepped back in. He got hit again and again, but he didn't flinch. He didn't back down. He left the gym that day with a split lip, a bruised ego, and a profound, exhilarating sense of victory. He had faced pain and held his ground. This principle began to bleed into every corner of his life. He was learning emotional control not through suppression, but through exposure. He was becoming the anchor by sailing into the storm. At work, during a high-stakes project meeting, a senior executive aggressively challenged his team's approach. The room went tense. The old Alex would have become defensive, over-explaining, his voice rising in pitch as he sought to justify his position. The new Alex remained silent for a beat, letting the challenge hang in the air. He held the executive's gaze, his posture relaxed but solid. "I understand your concern," he said, his voice low and calm, "but the data supports our strategy. We're staying the course." There was no pleading, no justification, just a statement of fact, delivered from a place of unshakable certainty. The executive, taken aback by the lack of emotional reaction, sputtered for a moment before nodding curtly. "Fine, make it work." In that moment, Alex felt a shift in the room's energy. He hadn't won an argument. He had demonstrated leadership. He hadn't reacted. He had responded. He had held his frame. He applied this same principle to his social life. He stopped being the accommodating, always available friend. When invited to things he had no interest in, he learned the simple, powerful magic of the word no, delivered without a lengthy excuse. "Can't make it, but have a good time." He was reclaiming his time, treating it as his most valuable asset. And a funny thing happened. People started respecting it more. His presence became something to be appreciated, not assumed. He was creating scarcity. and it was making him more valuable in the eyes of others. That his weekends were no longer empty slots waiting to be filled by a date. He took up rock climbing, an activity that demanded absolute focus and presence. When he was on a rock face, clinging to a precarious hold 100 feet in the air, he couldn't think about women, about work, about anything other than the here and now. He was building a life that was genuinely his, a life filled with purpose and passion that was generated from within. His happiness was no longer a fragile thing, dependent on external validation. It was being forged in the heat of his own endeavors. 3 months after deleting Sarah's number, he felt like a different man. He walked differently, with a grounded sense of purpose. He spoke differently, with an economy of words that gave them more weight. His eyes, once tinged with a quiet anxiety, now held a calm, centered focus. He was still a kind person, still respectful, but the neediness, the desperation to be liked, had been burned away. It was then that he decided he was ready to date again. But this time, he would not be the one auditioning. He met a woman named Clara at an art gallery opening. She was sharp, witty, a lawyer with a quick laugh and intelligent eyes. The old Alex would have immediately put her on a pedestal, showering her with compliments, trying to prove he was worthy of her attention. The new Alex was different. He approached her not with a pickup line, but with a confident, curious observation about the art. He listened more than he spoke, but when he did speak, it was with a playful, challenging edge. "You're a lawyer," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. "So you argue for a living. Must be exhausting." She raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the tease. "Some might say I'm just very persuasive. And what do you do that's so relaxing?" "I build things and I break things," he said, leaving it at that. He created a small gap of mystery. He didn't rush to elaborate on his prestigious job. He let her wonder. He found her fascinating, but he didn't let it show in a flood of validation. He maintained a sense of detachment. He steered the conversation, but he was also the first to end it. "Well, Clara, the persuasive lawyer," he said after about 10 minutes of engaging banter, "it was a pleasure, but I have to meet up with some friends. Enjoy the rest of the exhibition." He didn't ask for her number. He just smiled, gave a slight nod, and walked away. He felt the pull of her gaze on his back as he left. He had created a vacuum. He had established a frame. He was a man with his own life, his own priorities, and while he enjoyed their interaction, his world did not revolve around her. Left her with an unresolved puzzle. 2 days later, a friend request popped up on his social media. It was Clara. He smiled. The game had shifted. She was the one investing, the one putting in the effort to bridge the gap he had created. He accepted the request, but didn't immediately message her. He let the silence sit. He was operating on his own timeline, not hers. He was unpredictable. When he finally did message her, it was simple and direct. "That exhibition was a bust, but our conversation wasn't. I'm going climbing this Saturday. You should come, if you're not afraid of heights." It was bold. It was a challenge. It was an invitation into his world, on his terms. It wasn't a conventional dinner and a movie date that felt like a job interview. It was an experience. Her reply was almost instantaneous. "Only if you're not afraid of me showing you up." The dynamic was set. It was a dance of two strong personalities, a playful push and pull, not a one-sided performance of a man trying to win a woman's approval. Their first date was thrilling, not just because of the climbing, but because of the emotional tension between them. He was warm and encouraging when she was on the wall, but he would also tease her, challenge her, and never let the conversation become a boring exchange of pleasantries. He was a roller coaster with a seatbelt safe but thrilling. He learned to pace the intimacy. He would share something personal, a story from his past that revealed a layer of vulnerability. But then he would pull back, creating distance, letting her miss him. He mastered the art of being present but not predictable. He was learning to be the man she couldn't quite figure out, the man she couldn't own, and he could see it in her eyes. She was hooked. It was during this time that fate, with its penchant for cruel irony, decided to reintroduce Sarah into his life. He ran into her at a coffee shop he frequented. She was standing in line, looking flustered, her hair messier than he remembered. He felt a faint echo of the old ache, a ghost of the man he used to be, but it was just that tan echo. "Alex," she said, her eyes widening in surprise. "Wow, you look different, Sarah," he said, his voice even, his smile genuine but contained. "Good to see you." There was no bitterness in his tone, but more importantly, there was no longing. He was calm, centered, his presence filling the space around him in a way it never had before. He was holding his frame. I'm sorry about..." She stammered, looking down at her phone. How I just disappeared. That was a jerk move. I was going through some stuff. The old Alex would have seized on this, offering forgiveness, seeking an explanation, trying to reopen the door. The new Alex simply nodded. We all go through things. Hope you're doing better. He wasn't cold. He was just detached. Her drama was hers, not his. He wasn't her emotional anchor or her confidant. His peace was no longer contingent on her approval or apology. He had messes the detachment. He gave her nothing, and in that nothingness, he could see the questions screaming in her mind. So, are you seeing anyone? She asked, a little too quickly. It was a test, a probe to see if he was still available, still on the shelf where she had left him. I'm enjoying my life, he said, a response that was both true and maddeningly ambiguous. He gave a polite smile. My coffee's ready. It was good seeing you, Sarah. He turned and walked away, not looking back. He felt her eyes on him, just as he had with Clara, but this time, it was different. It was the gaze of a woman who had let something go, and was only now, in its absence, beginning to understand its value. He had walked away with silence, with composure, with dignity, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that the seed of doubt had been planted. Did I lose something rare? Later that week, she texted him, an unknown number, but he knew it was her. Hey, it's Sarah. It was really good to see you. You seem happy. We should catch up properly sometime. He looked at the message, a testament to the power of his transformation. The woman who had ghosted him was now the one pursuing him. The script had been completely flipped. But as he looked at her name on the screen, he felt no triumph, no desire for revenge. He simply felt indifferent. He had outgrown her. He had outgrown the need for her validation. He was happy, but his happiness was no longer tied to her or any woman. It was his own. He had become the prize. He thought about the two paths presented by his anonymous mentor, the path of the worst guys, who used these psychological triggers unconsciously, leaving a trail of destruction, and the path of the enlightened man, who used them with integrity and purpose. He had chosen the latter. He had become dangerous, not in a toxic way, but in a powerful way. He had standards. He held his frame. He had a mission. He was dating Clara, a woman who challenged and excited him, a woman who respected him because he respected himself. Their relationship wasn't built on his performance or her validation, but on a mutual polarity of strength and desire. It was real. He put his phone down, leaving Sarah's text unanswered. He didn't need to reply. His silence was the reply. It was the final confirmation that he was no longer the man she had known. That man was gone forever. He walked to his window and looked out at the city. It was the same view, but he was seeing it with new eyes. He had started this journey to solve the puzzle of women, to crack the code of attraction, but along the way, he had discovered a deeper truth. The game was never about getting the woman. It was about getting himself back. He had stopped chasing love and started building a life. He had stopped seeking approval and started commanding respect, starting with his own. He was no longer just a good guy. He was a grounded man, an emotionally disciplined man. A man who understood that true power wasn't in being liked, but in being respected. A man who was a force, not a follower. He had cracked the code, yes, but the ultimate reward wasn't the devotion of a woman, though that might come. The ultimate reward was the unshakable, unflinching devotion he had finally found for himself. He was the anchor, he was the prize, and in a world of men who crumbled, he had learned to stand. He was free.